Hey, welcome to Android Developer Office Hours. I am Joe Fernandez from the Android Developer Relations team, and I'm joined by...
Hi everyone, my name is Trevor Johns.
Hi everyone, my name is Bruno Oliveira.
Hey, my name is Alex Lucas.
All right, and yes, we are all members of the Android Developer Relations team here in Mountain View, California. We do have a special guest. Bruno is visiting us from our Sao Paulo office. So he just literally walked in moments ago. So I think this is actually your first time joining us here on the air, right?
Yes, it's the first time joining you on this side of the camera.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So let's see. Why don't we get started with something off of moderator?
Actually, before we get started, I should point out that this is in fact a non-confidential Google.
Wait, is it? Oh, sorry.
It is. So last time we were here, actually, I had this tablet with me, and some people thought it was actually some sort of confidential, undisclosed tablet, and that's actually not the case. This is it's a Novo 7 Paladin. It's a nice little sub $100 Android tablet that I was using last week to read questions off of. So yes, you can actually go out there and buy this right now. Nothing secret or anything like that. We know better than that.
At least we like to think so. Anyway, so why don't we get started with moderator question number 1. The Android design guidelines are extremely hard to follow without the action bar support for pre-Honeycomb devices. This is true. Why hasn't this included in the support package? What is recommended for the following Android design for these devices? This would be a great Roman Nurek question, but Roman's not with us today. Anybody else want to tackle that one?
Yeah, so we certainly know that there's demand to go and have support for Action Bar in the support library. It turns out that there were some technical issues that didn't allow us to do this. It's not quite as simple as just going and copying the code over. So yeah, for now our recommended approach is to use Action Bar Sherlock. And so I was reading through the comments on here, and it seemed like the author's concern with that was that he wasn't sure what the license was for Action Bar Sherlock. And my understanding is that it is in fact licensed under the Apache license, so it's a permissive license. You're free to use it in your code, and it works pretty well. So right now our recommended approach is to use Action Bar Sherlock. We can't talk about the future of the support library, but we do know that there's a demand to go and add this feature. So.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. Let's take one more moderator question here. The main screen in the Play Store has a clever twist with the Categories tab. It fills only half the screen on a tablet. How is this done? Anybody want to check on that one?
All right, so yeah, I was talking with Dan. Actually, I think you were talking with him too, right? So yeah, why don't you answer this one?
All right, so we actually took a look at it. It's not the term tabs is a little bit of a misnomer. They're actually really just buttons.
Yeah, it confused me. I couldn't figure out what this question was actually talking about. Yeah. I thought, maybe, when you click on the apps button, you have that view pager there and you can swipe left or right. And to me, that's what I think of as tabs there.
Right.
But as far as we can tell, that's not what the person asking this was actually talking about.
I think the confusion was that the person asking actually thought that these were tabs, in which case it would be a set of tabs vertically stacked in a tiny chunk of the screen somewhere in the middle, which would be very difficult to do, and I don't think we actually have that kind of functionality built in. They're really just buttons, though.
So yeah, so this is the very first page of the app. You launch Google Play, and you have 4 buttons. Hey, apps, apps, books, music, and movies, if I remember correctly. And yeah, so they're literally just buttons. They might look like tabs, but there's nothing special about them. And then you can just use normal layout managers to go and align them however you'd want.
So the secret is to make buttons look like tabs, and then you can do whatever you want.
Right.
Yes. The secret of UI is just make everything do what you want it to do by making them all into tabs.
Right. Or buttons.
There you go. Or buttons, depending on what you want to do. All right. Looks like we've got somebody in the Hangout, one of our regulars. Do you have a question, sir?
Yes, I've got one. I need to do image views that go from, that change the picture from 0, to have the number 0 on the screen, and then it goes from 0 to 100 in 3 seconds.
Okay.
So you want it to count up to 100 in 3 seconds?
Yes, it needs to go from, 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 100.
But can you tell us why you need specifically an image view for that? Or why is it that you need an image view and not a standard text view or other widget?
Well, it doesn't have to be an image, it has to be something that presents a picture because it's pictures, because it's special
Okay.
numbers that were designed for the app.
Okay, I understand.
Okay.
So, I mean, that should be possible. That's going to be roughly 30 frames per second, which is perfectly within the refresh rate of the screen. The only limiting factor there, I think, is going to be how quickly can you go and load these images off of your storage and get them into memory and into a place that you can go and copy them into your video buffer. So I think as long as you preload everything, there shouldn't be anything really technically challenging about this.
Can you give us an estimate about how big those bitmaps are? I mean, are they full-screen bitmaps or are they just tiny images?
They are PNGs.
Right, but how large are they?
Let me just check that. And one more thing, I did already something that I loaded all the image views of 0 to 9 and just did, I played with the visible and invisible, based on the number that I need to show. But that took 9 seconds to get from 0 to 100.
Right.
Yeah, well, I think in that case, the really tricky thing is that you've gone in, I mean, that's a lot of data to be trying to go and load up all at once.
Yeah, the best case scenario would be if the bitmaps are small enough that you can hold them all in memory and then just display, because if you have to swap them back and forth from memory, yeah, you may have performance
Well,
problems.
not only that too, but you're going to be modifying your layout.
Yeah, that's true.
And when you modify the layout, that's a lot more complicated than just swapping an image out. There's actually a lot of structure behind it that has to adjust, right? And we have the entire layout tree that we're going to have to go and
refresh.
yeah.
So,
Another thing that I heard about, you tell me maybe it's better to use something that's called, 1 second, let me just see what it's called level list. Could that possibly faster the speed of
a level list drawable?
Yeah.
That's usually not what it's intended for, but I don't know if you could sort of cajole it into doing that. Another option would be to just extend directly a canvas.
Yeah, so
And
that's
then
what I was
just paint
thinking too.
bitmaps.
So I mean, what you're essentially doing is you're playing full screen video, or I was full frame rate video, right? And the way our video players work is they don't actually go and have an imagery that they keep updating. They just have essentially a canvas that they're drawing to, and really that's going to be your key here, right? So make sure that you're not, every time you have a new frame of your video, which is essentially what this is, that you can just go and draw that in place without having to go and modify your view hierarchy. And really the easiest way to do that is going to be to go and use a canvas and just go and paint your pixels right on top of whatever is already on the screen.
Yeah, exactly.
And that way also you can skip the step of having to clear it too, right? So if you reload the same or if you reuse the same image view, right, you're going to have most likely. Actually, no, I don't think if you just update it in place, I don't think it will have to clear it.
Then you wouldn't have the whole layout overhead.
Right. So yeah, you might be able to get away with that too. I mean, it's still going to be a bit heavier than if you just have a canvas and paint it directly. So that's going to get you the best performance. But you might be able to get away with just reusing the same image view and updating the source that's being fed into it each time.
Yeah. And of course, be careful about keeping a lot of bitmaps in memory, since there's a memory limit.
Right.
Well,
it's very easy to run that over with bitmaps.
Well, I just checked the file sizes of those numbers. Each one is about somewhere between 4 to 7 kilobytes.
Yeah, but be careful that Android keeps them uncompressed in memory. So the file size may not reflect how much memory it actually takes when you load it into a bitmap object. So, but I mean, assuming the images are not very large, it should be all right.
Yeah, and then, make sure that you're not scaling them too. I mean, at 30 frames per second, you might be able to get away with it, but it's cutting it close. I would try and make sure that whatever resolution you're going to be displaying these on your screen is the resolution that they're stored locally, and keep that processing pipeline as short as possible between your disk and your GPU.
I see. Okay. Thank you. I'll try that and see how.
You can consider OpenGL.
Well, yeah, but that's that's the last option on the menu.
It should be possible without OpenGL. I mean, it's video. Video does take a bit of work, but it is entirely possible without having to resort to native code.
True.
Okay.
Or OpenGL for that matter, which is not always native, but yes.
Right.
Okay. Thank you for the help.
Great. Thanks for the question. Let's take take another moderated question here. There needs to be a way for apps on API 11 Plus to hide the system bar at the bottom. Truly go full screen, not just change the nav icons to dots. And an example of how to bring the system bar back could be to press the power button. I think we've got something.
Yes,
an
so
answer for this already, right?
we do. So in, I believe in Honeycomb, we added something which we called light stack mode, which is those little dots at the bottom that you're seeing. So the idea there was to go and give you, a way to go and take away a lot of the OS Chrome, not Chrome OS, OS Chrome, the visual elements drawn by the OS, and basically give you more of a just a clean, minimalist environment for doing things like playing videos, reading books, etc. In Ice Cream Sandwich, we took that a step further and added the ability to allow apps to go fully full screen. So you do have the old lights out mode, that's still an option, or you can say hide the system bar entirely. I can't remember the API call off the top of my head. I can look it up here in a moment. I looked it up right before the show, but I've already forgotten it. But it's just a flag that you go and use for set system UI visibility. Now, the catch with this, though, is the system bars will replace the home button. And the home button is sort of important. That's sort of a sacred button that should never, ever be hidden or overridden, and we make sure that that never happens. So if you are actually saying, I want to hide that, we provide a mechanism to go and pull it back up. And what we decided that we wanted to do for that was make it so if you tap anywhere on the screen, your system bar comes back up. The use case for this is playing, for example, a YouTube video, or any video for that matter. You get rid of the video, but if you tap somewhere, just like the video controls come up, so does your home button. So that's the behavior you get automatically when you use that. And because the home button is sacred, there is no way to override that behavior. So I was reading through the comments, and you'd suggested that maybe you wanted something else like using the power button, or there are various, or having a gesture. There's a lot of different approaches you could use for this. But we decided that the use case we wanted for this, because it really is the simplest one, and this the one users are already familiar with from videos, is if you tap on the screen, the home button comes back. I know you said in your comments that this was for a handwriting recognition program, and you wanted to use, like for detecting gestures, and you wanted to make sure someone who's left-handed doesn't hit the home button. Probably the best feedback I can think of there is maybe we should move the home button to the other side of the screen as an option, and that's good feedback for our UI team, but unfortunately I don't think that there's really any way that I can think of to go and get the behavior you're looking for where that home button's completely gone.
Yeah, and my understanding of that is we don't want to take away those buttons because that's like the one thing that can get people out of whatever they're doing at the moment, right?
Yeah,
So
we want
that's why
to
for
make it
video-
very, very findable, right?
Right.
The home button is the one button that will always get you back. The back button can be overridden. You might not have any other apps in your app switcher. The home button will always get you home, and so that needs to be very, very discoverable.
Right.
Also, in the good old days of physical buttons, you couldn't do away with the home button anyway. So
True.
that part of the screen, you should just consider that part of the screen as a part of the hardware. It's a part of the device that the user needs it's an essential part of the device. There's not much we can do about that.
Right. Design, it works as designed. So let's head off to the next question. We've got a couple more people in the Hangout. Any of you guys want to ask a question to us? I see Josh has got a comment here.
That was regarding the one of the previous questions.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I was looking into. I was using essentially just a plain old Java library. They were using externalizable for a lot of their serialization. I was wondering, for passing it through bundles and using extras and so forth, how well would externalizable work compared with parcelable?
Sorry, compared with what?
Parcelable.
Parcelable. Okay.
No clue. Anybody?
No clue.
I do not know.
So your question is about the performance of serializable versus parcelable?
Well, nothing. I mean, serializable is kind of poor just because it's using a lot of reflection and everything. But with externalizable, you actually define the serialization yourself, and so it should theoretically perform quite a bit faster. for a lot of the same reasons that Parcelable works a lot faster.
Okay.
I could see that working. Yeah, or I could see that making sense. I mean, a lot of the additional classes we've added on Android were added specifically because of performance constraints. So, you know, I think you're going to get the best performance with Parcelable. But yeah, externalizable. I mean, I haven't actually used externalizable myself. But, what you're saying makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it's a lot more, because, you know, you're not supposed to use Parcelable for, you know, saving to a file or something like that. It's mainly for inter-process communication. Whereas externalizable actually can be used for, you know, writing to a file and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So,
that's correct. But externalizable also, I mean, lets you specify what file format you want, correct?
right, I think so.
Yeah, so whereas Parsable, I imagine, is going to have some very minimalist in-memory format that doesn't make any sense outside of the device's you know, context.
Mm-hmm.
So for that reason, you probably have a little bit more overhead with externalizable because you have to go and you know, possibly map to some, or well, you will be mapping to some other file format, right? That's not necessarily optimized for consumption on the device.
Okay.
I mean, think if you've ever looked at protocol buffers, which we use internally at Google, you know, there's the same basic idea there, right? The way protobufs are so fast is because you have this specification which maps from fields to essentially byte arrays inside of a file. And unless you have the protobuf file, which gives you the mapping of everything, you know, you can't. There is no way to decode it. It would just look like a random block of bytes. But because of that, you get really good performance at the cost of portability.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep.
Well, thanks for the question. All right, let's take another one from moderator. What is the lifespan of a static block in the class in an Android app? More specifically, when exactly is the code in the static block run, and when are the variables nulled out? This is a question from Enhant in Jerusalem. What do you guys think?
All right. So first, I think we'd have to define what you mean by static block, right? I mean, there's different places you can use the static keyword. But so let's say that it's just, you know, simplest case, you have some static variables that are included with your class, right?
Or like static open curly braces.
Same thing. Mm-hmm. So in that case, it's, as far as I understand it, I mean, the rules on Android are the same as in Java. So your variables are going to get initialized when the VM loads your class, which would, I believe, be as soon as you launch your application, correct?
Yes, depending on your usage. It might be the case that a particular class is loaded later. So I would try not to rely too much on this behavior, and then just use static blocks for things that should truly be static. And I mean, it shouldn't matter what exactly the life cycle is.
Right.
So I wouldn't rely on that too much.
The general rule, though, that should be followed is it follows the same as it's standard Java conventions.
Right.
So, I mean, I've seen interesting cases where some sort of lock-free singleton thing, like design pattern, where you use the fact that a member variable in a private class, even if it's static, doesn't get initialized until it's accessed for the first time. And it's a handy optimization, but you're relying a little bit too much on you know, black magic there.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that, well, static blocks should be used sparingly. So if you have like large chunks of code into your static blocks, there may be something wrong with the code design. So the first thing that I would ask myself is whether I need or not to have these very complex static blocks.
Yeah. And to answer the second part of this question, as far as when the variables are nulled out, I mean, that would be when the class is unloaded from the VM, which I believe in most cases is going to be when your process ends on Android.
Which is not when your activity goes off screen, of course. So
but it could be.
It could be.
It could be, and it might not be. It entirely depends on what other parts of your application you have, mm-hmm. and what's running, and what settings you set in your manifest, and a whole host of other things that makes that actually a very complicated topic. The short version is it will get unloaded at some point, and I wouldn't rely on it.
Yeah, again, if you're relying on that for correctness, there might be something wrong with the code design.
Okay, thanks for that question. Let's go to the Hangout again. We've got a couple more joiners. Anybody else got a question that's actually in the Hangout?
There's a lot of people always say that Android is a lot worse than iOS simply because of the poor app
So you're going to have to
quality.
speak up a little bit. We can actually barely hear you in here.
Just a little closer to the mic or a little louder, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's
Yes,
much better.
Thank you.
I tend to find a lot of people on the internet say that Android is worse than iOS due to the app quality, and I was just wondering if the Android team were thinking about incorporating something to help tidy up the Android code for new developers. So if there's code that's out of date, would it possibly be capable of tidying up the code for them to help new developers?
So, sorry, what context are you thinking of? Are you thinking, like, what code would be tidied up here?
Basically, code that it says is, I can't think of the exact word that it uses, but when I'm developing an Eclipse, from time to time I come across things where there's a line through the code and it says, this is out of date.
Oh, deprecated.
Deprecated, that's the one, sorry.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think that's really an app quality issue. That's SDK issues, and that's maintaining backwards compatibility, right? Now, we can't easily remove those because if there are older apps and we remove those, they will stop compiling and or stop working, depending on how it's done. And we do pride ourselves on maintaining a backwards compatibility in Android. So we want to go and keep those around as long as possible, even though we display warnings saying, please don't use these. But I think that's a completely orthogonal issue to app quality, right? Regardless of whether or not you're using deprecated SDK calls, as an end user, I'm not going to see that, right? I'm going to see the UI that's been designed, and the quality of the assets, and what UI conventions I'm using, and what my application's navigational structure is, right?
Performance is it?
Performance is another very important issue. Yeah.
Does it do what I want it to do, et cetera? That sort of quality.
Yeah. How well does it conform to the UI conventions too?
Right.
And I mean, this is something we think about. We just recently released our Android design site, which goes into quite a bit of detail about what different conventions are used throughout Android and what UI developers should be following. We've also been doing quite a bit of work on the framework side. Ever since Honeycomb, we've released our Holo theme with the goal of both giving a visual refresh for the Android platform, but providing a single theme that's guaranteed to be present on all devices, even if the rest of the system theme has been modified or customized by OEMs. So you're always guaranteed on a Honeycomb or newer device to have the Holo theme present. But really, I mean, a lot of we're trying to put the tools out there to go and make sure that app developers can write quality apps and make sure that you follow the same guidelines. But part of it too is just app developers have to follow those guidelines. We can only do so much on our end. Sorry.
I just happen to be a relatively new developer myself on the Android platform, so I just want to make sure that I get everything as good as possible, because I'm only developing a simple SMS scheduler app at the moment. I just want to make sure that customers who use Android devices feel that they get as good quality apps as people on other platforms.
So in that case, I would definitely take a look at the Android design site. How your UI looks is going to be one of the most important things as far as how users perceive the quality of the application. And then I'd say the second most important thing is performance.
I do quite like the Holo UI theme. I use that myself, and a lot of the people I've asked for feedback say that the UI looks great. So thank you for the Holo theme that you introduced.
Yeah, and I should add too. I mean, just specifying the Holo theme is not going to be enough, right? That'll get you the visual look and feel, but of course, how you actually design your UI matters a lot too, and we can't do that for you automatically, right? I mean, how do your buttons look? How do you structure your action bar? How have you hired a graphic designer to go and do your graphics? Because most programmers are actually not that good at graphic design.
Except for Roman.
Except for Roman. Roman is very good.
I don't think he's for hire at the moment. So.
Right.
But yeah, and the other thing too, pay very close attention to performance. I think it's easy to overlook that. Probably the easiest thing to do is go into developer options if you have a newer phone and turn on strict mode. If you have an older phone, there's a line of code you can add to your application to do the same thing. And what that will do is it will flash the border of your screen red every time you perform a blocking I/O operation on the UI thread. And so that's probably the most commonly performed mistake. And what that'll cause is it'll make your app slow down. It'll cause visual lag and stutter whenever you do things like read from disk. And I believe newer phones will even actually crash if you try and access the network from the UI thread, even if you don't have strict mode enabled.
Yeah, the UI thread, you should only be doing UI from the UI thread. Anything else should go into a background thread. So also, a pretty important resource to read is the best practices. So if you go into our developer.android.com and go into Dev Guide, we have a whole section on best practices. And that includes performance, that includes responsiveness. So there's a whole lot of material there that is very important to make sure that your apps are as pleasant as possible to the user. The other very important point is to make sure that your application is intuitive to the user, because nobody's going to read a manual to figure out how your app works. And sometimes as developers, it's easy to trick ourselves into believing that our app is intuitive because we know how it works. But sometimes it's not going to be as intuitive to a user.
Yeah,
so
I
a good test to make is just give your app to a user who has never used it before and watch them and see if they can figure out how it works. If they cannot, if they look puzzled, then there's probably a problem.
Right, so yeah, we actually have UI Labs here at Google where we actually have two rooms. One room which is set up as just a room with a computer, and then a one-way mirror, and then a bunch of engineers watch the user performing common tasks on the other side. Now, not everyone can afford a fancy two-room setup, but it really is as simple as just giving your app to somebody and say, hey, could you try doing X, and don't tell them how to do it. Just watch and see what they do and see where they get confused.
Exactly.
All right, so why don't we move on? Thanks for the question. Please come back next week and let us know if you've got more questions about it. Maybe we can do some follow-up on it. And
thank you for the responses.
Yeah, and actually, one more thing that I should note. We do have a show on Friday called The App Review. And if you look through the moderator, I believe, we do use the same moderator for it? I think we do.
I believe we do.
Yeah.
If not, check our Google Plus page and you can find a link to it. But you can submit your app for review. And we have a panel of engineers who will go through and they'll tell you what looks good and what could be improved. And so if you're really striving for quality, getting some critique that way, just like artists ask people for a critique, same thing with apps, right? Ask some peers, including us, and we can go ahead and take a look through your app and tell you what we think could be better.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, so I believe that's Friday at 1 p.m., but if you want to get your app on the air, you do need to submit it in advance. So there is a moderator queue.
Yeah. And be sure to follow Android developers on Google+. Then we're going to announce those Hangouts there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question and the answers there. Let's go to moderator for another question here. Absolute layout is deprecated, and we're told to use relative layout instead, but relative layout is very poor support on the graphic editor. I think they mean the layout editor in Eclipse there.
Yeah, part of ADT.
Should I stop using the graphic editor or just use absolute layout anyway?
The answer to that is do not use absolute layout. Do not use it, please. The problem with absolute layout is it doesn't work when you have devices with different screen sizes, and Android has devices with different screen sizes, and therefore you get apps that look really bad. This ties in with our whole conversation about app quality.
Exactly.
So yes, you absolutely should use relative layout, or honestly, use anything except absolute layout. Absolute layout is probably the worst choice, period. Honestly,
how do you really feel about that?
but should I use absolute layout?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe
What about
not.
absolute layout?
But yeah, and admittedly, our layout editor doesn't work in all use cases, and as your app UI gets more complicated, it might not work for you. Personally, I find it works really well to go and get the initial prototype of your UI set up, and then from there you'll have to tweak things in XML. I think all really good applications, if you have a good UI, you're going to wind up having to write XML by hand.
Yeah, so it's all about making sure you're targeting multiple devices, and don't assume you've got one size fits all for your layout. You just gotta make sure it moves and is dynamic. So
Yeah, and I hate to make this comparison, but yeah, think of the layout editor as Microsoft Front Page or Dreamweaver, right? It's really good for getting a quick prototype built, but if you're doing your site design, hopefully you're not doing the whole thing in Dreamweaver.
all right.
And then not to say anything bad about either of those programs.
I actually like Dreamweaver, but
No, it's a good
I
program.
use the code view way more often.
Exactly. Well,
Right.
that's one of the things I liked about Dreamweaver is that they did make it very easy to switch into the code view. Nothing against Dreamweaver. I've used it a lot myself, but I know some people, like myself back in high school, who have written some sites entirely using the
Not so much written as click
the
and
Wiz-
drag.
yeah,
your way
using the
through site
WYSIWYG tool.
creation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now the truth comes out. Okay, all right. So moving on then. Let's see. We've got some more folks in the Hangout. Anybody on the Hangout itself want to ask?
We have one
That's a
in
written
chat.
question.
Oh, we have chat questions. Excellent.
On Android security.
Let's see. Tony Owen asks, have we had a question about transitional drawable? If you get a chance.
We have a chance.
We do have a chance. Here is your chance, Tony. Ask the question.
Hi guys. I use a transitional drawable just to do a quick transition between 3 gradients which are drawable XML, and it runs for 10 seconds. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be anything that fires once it's completed. So it happens that I have a countdown timer running at the same time, and the way I'm getting around it is that after every 10 seconds I reverse the transition again. I'm just wondering if that's really the best thing that I should be using, or if there's something else I should be doing to make this simple animation.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what is it you're trying to do with it? Is it something you're displaying something on screen, obviously, but what's your goal for it?
Yeah, it uses the entire of the relative layout to display a radial gradient, which is used on a baby soothing app. And it just changes colour, so it goes from green to yellow to red, and then reverses itself.
Well, I'm drawing a blank. Any of you guys want to try that one?
Yeah, I don't have any good answers there either.
I don't know off the top of my head.
I think we might have to punt and ask you to do a Stack Overflow question for us, so you can show us the code and see and tell us what the problem is. And if you can add a question into Moderator and give us a link to the Stack Overflow, we could probably take a look at it that way. Because it looks like we don't have any answers off the top of our head.
Well, actually, Moderator might not be the best place to put it because Moderator will close at the end of this show. So just put it as a comment to this video.
Right. And
Well, not Moderator as a whole, just this one series. Moderator will keep going.
Right.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate the question. All right. Let's go to Moderator again. Molo from Portland, Oregon asks, I'm working on a widget that has a list view. How can I manually update a list on a button press? I've tried to set the action of an intent through App Widget Manager, action app with get update, but nothing ever happens. Is there anything I'm missing? Probably yes. The question is, what are you missing?
So yeah, so there is actually a method you call to indicate that your data source has been updated.
That's notify data set changed.
Yes, that's the one. And I think there's actually a special version for widgets as well.
Oh,
It's
right.
I think it's like on widget notify data set or
Yeah, it's something
app
like
widget
that.
notify data set change. I wish I had a computer at that with me right now to look up the exact verbiage for it. But you get the idea. Look for data set changed on data set changed, and you'll find probably a couple of methods that will help you with this. And then once you send that, there's a callback that you'll implement inside of your widget that will allow you to respond to it.
I think I'm spoiled by IntelliSense, but that's one of those methods that I know exists, but I can never for the life of me remember the name of.
It's like notify control space. Right?
Right. I just type .notify and wait for Eclipse to populate something for me.
I think I need to start writing these down before the show. List of methods that I won't remember when I'm actually in front of the camera.
Yes.
Exactly.
That's going to be a large list.
Yeah.
Well, all right. List of methods that I've noticed from the questions that I'll forget in front of the camera.
Okay, that works.
All right, next question. We've got a chat question. David, I'm going to terribly mess up this. The whale. You're going to have to correct me on that one.
I'm not going to correct you.
Security. What? Sorry, we'll say again?
I'm not going to correct my last name. It's going to be too difficult, I think.
Okay. You want to tell us what the question is?
Yeah, so I'm basically developing a REST API, which I'm going to put on the internet, which is exposed through SSL. And I've been giving it a lot of thought about having some kind of end-to-end security strategy. I think on the server side, I have pretty much everything covered. But I was wondering, on a mobile device, is it a correct assumption that on a rooted Android phone or a jailbroken iPhone, whatever, it is impossible to secure properly? There will always be a way for a malware app or a hacker to get into the device, decrypt stuff.
Right, so we're actually going to stop you right there. Our camera reset in the middle of your question, and we didn't hear most of that. So we're going to have to ask you to start from the beginning. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Okay.
apologies.
Is it a correct assumption that a rooted Android phone is inherently insecure? That there is no way to properly secure a rooted Android phone?
Okay. Yes, the question was: is it possible to have a secure rooted phone, or are they always insecure?
No, just always assume that a rooted phone is insecure.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah. So the Android security model depends on sandboxing apps by process ID, as well as by user ID. So when you install an app, the system will assign it a unique user ID for that particular application. And the problem is if you root your phone and you allow applications to run as root, it means every application can read from every other application sandbox. And so you've completely disabled Android sandboxing functionality, which is in fact insecure. So yeah, now there are some apps like SuperUser out there which attempt to mitigate this by adding some hooks that will pop up a dialog and giving you like an allow deny choice whenever an app requires root permission. And that helps to go and improve this. The problem with that, though, is you're depending entirely on making sure that there's no privilege escalation bugs in the SuperUser app. And I've never done an analysis on this myself, but I know some of our security folks have, and they had a few concerns. I can't really speak any more to it than that because I don't remember. But I guess my point is, unless, given that I've never, given that it's sort of a sketchy area to begin with, and I don't think a lot of people have their eyes on this code, I'm sort of loath to trust it too inherently. And if you really do care about the data of your phone, the easiest thing is just not to root it. Now that being said, there's not too much that you actually need to root your phone for. I understand wanting to unlock your phone to put alternative firmwares on there, but actually putting root on your phone is only useful in a few specialized cases. Just out of curiosity, what is it that you're trying to do that requires root?
I don't require root at all, but I know that certain consumers of my REST API will run on a rooted phone.
Yeah. That is a concern. If your app is running on a rooted phone, that phone is not as secure as a phone that has not been rooted.
But if we turn the question around, and so we can assume that a non-rooted Android device is perfectly secure. If, for example, I have...
Well, I would not say perfectly secure.
I think you can say perfectly secure to anything.
Yes. As somebody who has studied computer science, I can say that I don't know of any system that is perfectly secure. I know of systems that are very secure, but I don't know of any that are perfectly secure.
Perfectly secure is sort of an asymptote where you can get close, but it doesn't exist. So in terms of...
Yeah, I think Android security is very good, but I'm not ever going to call anything perfect because I know later on I'll wind up regretting that.
If for no other reason, then you could treat the phone as though it were not rooted, and then someone could come along and root the phone.
Well,
or a rooted phone could pretend to be unrooted.
Yeah, or then you have other fun things like Tempest attacks, right? Where you have some shady guy in a van with a giant antenna pointed at your phone,
right,
and they're reading the electrical signals as your screen refreshes, right? There are all sorts of fun little side channel attacks that Yeah.
Somebody's been reading
You have
too
to-
many of these spy novels there. But anyway, sorry, did you have any more follow-up on that, or have we sufficiently beat you to death?
What would be like the general security guidelines that we would need to implement? For example, I have this kind of remember me functionality because I don't want the user to type in their username password every half an hour or every day, so I need to store some kind of credentials on the phone.
Okay.
So I can store, for example, an authentication code that comes from the REST API. I can encrypt that on the device. I can obfuscate my code. Would that be a sufficient level of security for a mobile app? Or
Yeah,
should we
so
go-
usually the recommendation I give is so basically what you're saying is you create an authentication token. So the very first time you log in, the user will provide their username and password. Of course, that hopefully is over an encrypted channel.
Yeah.
And then you return back a token that you save on the device instead. And then if the user ever changes their password via your web app, or whatever change password functionality you have, revoke all the old tokens and make the user re-authenticate on those devices. And so what that means is if most importantly, it means if somebody does manage to compromise your credential store, it means the user's plain text password isn't revealed. And the problem is users are usually pretty bad with their passwords. When they change them, a lot of times they'll change it by 1 digit, or worse, they'll go and reuse that password across a lot of different sites.
Yeah.
And therefore, if somebody discovers your plain text password for a user, that's very bad. Whereas if they just have an auth token, you can revoke that auth token and reuse it later, and that mitigates a lot of the risk there. Now, as far as obfuscating your code, that's it helps in some cases, and it does make it a little bit harder to go and understand your code if you run it through a decompiler. But the problem is if somebody really is determined, and there are a lot of determined people out there who enjoy trying to go and figure out how things work, that it might take them, instead of a day, it might take them a couple of weeks. But code obfuscation won't actually, it's not going to prevent somebody from trying to figure out what your code does, right? It removes hints.
Yeah, it's
it removes
not
a lot of
it's
context,
just trying to make them
but your
harder.
code is still there.
Yeah.
Also, yes, how much security you need really depends on how badly people are going to want to break it. So if you're protecting like bank data or like banking data, I mean, it's credentials with which somebody could lose money or something, then you're probably going to need better security than if it's just, I don't know, a chat application. So, I mean, it all depends on the case. If you obfuscate your code and you store your credentials encrypted and you take all these measures, then definitely it's going to take a very, very determined cracker to actually get the information. So you can never hope for 100% security. You can just make it very difficult.
Yeah, and if you really do want extra security, what I'd recommend is using X509 client certificates. And Android devices have an API that allows you to go and add additional certificates to the system key store, which has additional levels of protection compared to most other storage on the device. That being said, the UI story for X509 on any device, Android, your desktop computer, anything, has never been considered that user-friendly. So if you really do have a security need, it is an option, though.
Yeah, because here there's also this business requirement that user simplicity is also very important. I mean, users should only be able to key in username password once during some kind of registration flow, and then the thing should just work, basically. Like you have like with an OAuth 2 application where you kind of log in to a service, you get this access token, refresh token, and then you're good to go. But
yeah, so in that case, I'd say that most likely what you're looking for is to just go and store a randomly generated auth token generated for this user session, which is the it basically once they've logged in until they've cleared data on the app or reset their password, and then make sure you do store it within the application's data directory on internal storage, and you mark it as private. Every now and then we'll see somebody try and store credentials on the SD card, which is a very bad place to put them because the SD card doesn't enforce sandboxing. But yeah, I'd say that's probably your best option.
Preferences are okay.
Sorry?
Private shared preferences are...
Yes, that's sufficient.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks for the question, Davey. Let's see, we got about 12 minutes left. Let's try a little moderator question here. From Nick in Chicago, I'd like to make an application detect if other apps are installed and offer an option to launch them from within my app. Is that possible? I'm having deja vu. This sounds like something we've answered before.
Yeah, it's not only possible, it's actually super easy. All you have to do is query the package manager. And I mean, I assume you're going to have some sort of internal list of your applications. Just query package manager and it'll return a list of installed applications.
Yeah,
and just check the package names.
Yeah, and you can even just search for things. If you start all of your packages with com my company, right? Just grep through that list and find everything that starts with com my company.
I think you can actually just filter and have it return to filtered list.
Yeah, of course. Then you have to figure out what com my company, my app actually corresponds to as far as a human readable name. But to do that, you can actually then go a step further and check. You can actually look inside of that application's resource table and query for its its list of strings, or just ask what the application reports its title to. So yeah, as long as your applications are signed with the same developer signature, you can actually go and retrieve resources from other apps on the system. So that also gives you a lot of additional functionality there. But yeah, first step is take a look in Package Manager.
There you go. All right, thanks for that question. Anybody else on the Hangout have a new question we haven't heard from today?
Well, I've got one, but if I can.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Davey just said he left. So see you, Davey.
Thank you, Dave. Yes, go ahead.
I want to ask about how many Bluetooth connections can Android support simultaneously?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I didn't quite catch it.
How many Bluetooth connections can an Android device support simultaneously?
I think that's more of a hardware limitation than a software limitation.
Yeah, I want to say it's going to be device specific, right?
I'm pretty sure that it should be device specific.
Yeah,
so let's ask about the Galaxy Nexus, for example.
Well, I don't think anybody in this room can actually answer, because we're the experts in app development. We're not the people who actually build the devices. That's a different team. So, they sit right next to us, but we'd have to actually pull them in here and ask them. So yeah, that's not something I think we actually publish either. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're software guys, not hardware guys. So we'll have to defer to them. Let's try another. We've got about 10 minutes left, so let's take another question from moderator here. Any way to cut down on the number of emails sent by Google Checkout in relation to my Android apps? What, you don't like our email? I get
a lot of work into those.
Yeah, we do. I mean, there's people dedicated to writing those emails. But anyway, I get spammed daily by canceled by Google messages whenever the customer declines payment, fails a credit card verification, or asks for a refund. This is by Nikolai in Denmark.
So I think we always think that more information is better than less. And I mean, you can always create a Gmail filter and just filter those messages and put them into the correct bins. So that way,
put them in trash if you really don't want
them. Yeah, exactly, right. Or in a special bin called trash. But I mean, this can be useful if you need to search for them one day. Like there might be one day where you need to search for a particular order and see if it was canceled or not. So it might be useful to have that.
I'm going to briefly change this to Gmail user office hours. And say just pop open one of those emails, go to a little menu option that says filter messages like these, and then say skip inbox and maybe add a tag if you want, or send to trash, or there are checkboxes. You can pick exactly what you want to do.
Yeah. Now, of course, they might not be using Gmail.
Yeah. True. It's considering that it's a Google account that's receiving these.
It doesn't have to be Gmail, though.
Right.
You can create Google accounts that are not tied to a Gmail account.
That's true. Yeah. It is at least a semi-likelihood. If you're using Gmail, that's how you do it.
Yeah, and in fact, a lot of companies do that because they have their corporate mail system. So,
right.
Yeah. But, I mean, most systems do have the ability to filter mail, and I do agree with you. We probably should have a checkbox to go and control how frequently these messages are sent. Sadly, we don't. So I'll take that as feedback for the checkout team, and I'll pass it along for you. But in the meantime, the short-term mitigation is to use whatever filtering functionality exists in your mail client. So sorry about that.
Right. Short answer, email filters are your friend. Take advantage of them. I don't think we've got anybody new in the Hangout, so let's take another moderator question. Jason from Nashville asks, what does calling detach on a fragment and fragment transaction actually do when also adding the transaction to the backstack. OnDetach is never triggered in the fragment in this case.
If you're actually in the Hangout, I'm really curious to know why you are adding a detach to the backstack.
Jason, are you there? Calling Jason.
Yeah, silence. I don't think he's here.
No.
Yeah,
So speculate.
See, I'm really curious what you're trying to do too. We were discussing this for a few minutes before the show, and none of us could quite figure out what the use case here is.
I'm actually typically really good at wild speculation with very little to base it on.
I noticed that about you. Yes,
it's a gift. What can I say? But with this one, I couldn't actually, and unfortunately, I don't know the answer to the question.
Yeah.
Regardless of the purpose behind that behavior.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is, well, actually, I wonder if no. Actually, I'm drawing a blank here. I really can't think of a good use case. I mean, normally OnDetach gets called when your fragment is detached from the activity that contains it. So that's something normally the activity should do, is my understanding.
Yeah.
So whatever it is you're trying to do, if you can give us some more context, feel free to pop on the air. We'd love to hear it, and maybe we can give you a better answer. But the short version is don't do that.
Right. Otherwise, we'll just wildly speculate about why you're doing it, and so far that's been unproductive. So let's move on.
We haven't really even been good at the speculating part.
That's not even that's good today. All right. Okay. I don't see anybody else in the Hangout. We've got from Simon in Nancy, France. I discovered that multiplying two linear gradients doesn't work on ICS as expected in comparison to pre-ICS. On my color picker, the bottom is in black, doesn't appear, only white. New compose shader, val shader, stat shader, quarter shader, mode shader, multiply shader.
Okay.
On this one. Furthermore shader.
The best guess we have is try disabling hardware acceleration for your app. Shaders are not supported very well with hardware acceleration enabled, and as a result, it's possible that you've hit one of the use cases that hardware acceleration does not actually support. So try turning that off. It might be enabled on a per app basis, in which case you can go into the flag in your manifest. Barring that, there's also an option in developer options and system settings that will force this. So you could have that on too. It's off by default, but sometimes people do turn it on. It is in developer options for a reason. It does break things occasionally for the same reason. That's why it's an opt-in setting for your app. But there is basically just added flag to your manifest saying that you don't want hardware acceleration, and see if that fixes your problem.
Another advice is check if your manifest doesn't have any density equals false. Because I've seen a couple of cases where just setting any density on the Android manifest generates some weird graphics bugs, and that's because I think any density equals false makes the calculations for graphics coordinates a little off. So you shouldn't be using that anyway because it's mostly deprecated. But just make sure that you're not using it.
Okay. So thanks for that question. Let's see, Nick from Chicago says, I'm making a game using OpenGL ES. Is there a good example somewhere on how to recreate the OpenGL ES context and reloading textures after I pause and resume, targeting 2.2 and above, including Google TV, no JNI? Thanks.
Actually, yeah, we have a game in our samples called Replica Island. It was written, I want to say, 2 years ago by a team member at the time, Chris Pruitt, who just wanted to make a sort of a game showing general best practices for SDK, NDK, hardware acceleration, OpenGL, like all the stuff that goes into writing a good game. So the name of the game is Replica Island, and it's in the samples area of the SDK.
Right, and they should be. There's an example of that kind of pause.
Yes, and there's
yes. Take a look in the code, and there's an example in there. Yes.
Right. You should, instead of just mentioning it, that's where the answer is. That's the thing to check out. All right, about 3 minutes left, so we've got a couple more time for a couple more questions. Let's take anybody else in the Hangout actually want to ask a question? Last question of the day.
I know I've already asked a question, but could I possibly just maybe suggest something to the Google team? I've spoke to a couple of people on XDA in the past, and they have this problem with screen burning, and I'm wondering is that because they have their screen's brightness set too high? And if that's the case, is there a possible thing, like just a notification that Google could add to Android, so if people turn their brightness up full, it will warn them that they may get screen burning?
Screen burning because they've turned their brightness up too high. Is that
So the pixels are too bright on AMOLED displays, and that does tend to make some of the pixels look a bit yellowy, where white pixels have been in the past really bright.
I've actually never experienced that on any of my devices, and I usually have a device that has an AMOLED screen. I mean, it seems like a reasonable request, though, if that's actually, like, is this something that causes permanent damage or just temporary discoloration?
If you bring up something like a white picture on screen and zoom in, you may see slightly tinted parts where there was previously white pixels for long periods of time. Like, for instance, a battery percentage thing I have on my screen on the International Galaxy S2. Sorry, I have Asperger's syndrome, so I'm not really great at.
No, that's quite all right. I understand what you're saying.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean that seems like a reasonable request. Like I said, none of us here are hardware guys, so as far as actually how the screen control works, I don't think any of us are the right person to actually implement that change, but it's something we can pass along for you.
I just thought a possible notification would have been something that would have been more software side.
Well, it is, but it's still screen related, right? So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's outside of this realm of app development, is what I'm saying. So yeah, we're still not the ones who would make that change. So we can pass it along to the folks who would.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about
totally.
that.
Great. Okay, and word brings us right up to 3 o'clock, so I think we'll sign off. Thanks for all the questions today. We'll be back again next week, 2 p.m. Pacific, to take your questions again, and thanks for joining us.
All right, see you, everyone.
Thank you.